Did you ever wonder if the person you treated like nothing could one day become everything you desperately need? There's a moment frozen in time. A cafeteria, the smell of cheap pizza and disinfectant, fluorescent lights humming overhead. And in the corner, sitting alone with a book pressed against her chest like armor, there's a girl. Her name is Elena. Messy brown hair falling over thick framed glasses. A sweater 2 sizes too big, hiding her frame, hiding her presence, hiding her worth. To most people in that room, she doesn't exist. But to Marcus Chen, captain of the basketball team, son of the city's most powerful real estate developer, she exists just enough to be a target. He walks past her table with his entourage trailing behind, like satellites orbiting a star. The laughter starts before the words even form. "Hey, bookworm," he calls out, loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Still trying to read your way into having friends?" His crew erupts. Elena doesn't look up. She's learned that reaction only feeds them. Her fingers tighten around the pages. Marcus leans down, close enough that she can smell his expensive cologne. "You know what? Stay invisible. It suits you." Then he flicks her book onto the floor, and the cafeteria fills with the sound of shuffling feet and muffled giggles. She bends down to pick it up, and in that moment, with her face hidden and her body folded into the smallest version of itself, Marcus feels powerful. He feels untouchable. But power has a funny way of teaching lessons to those who wield it carelessly. 10 years passed like water through fingers. Time moves differently when you're not paying attention. Marcus graduates. College comes easy when your father's name opens doors before you even knock. A business degree from an Ivy League school. A corner office at 25. Parties on yachts. Watches that cost more than most people's cars. Life becomes a sequence of things money can buy and influence can control. His father, Richard Chen, builds an empire of glass towers and luxury condos, and Marcus stands beside him, learning to see the world as something to be acquired, negotiated, leveraged. Then the ground shifts. It starts with whispers at board meetings, financial inconsistencies, investigations. Richard Chen, the titan of industry, has been cutting corners, bribing officials, hiding debt behind shell companies built on lies. When the truth comes out, it comes out like a flood. Federal charges, frozen assets. The family name that once opened every door now slams them shut. Marcus watches his father's empire crumble in real time. Each news cycle another blow, another revelation, another piece of the foundation giving way. The penthouse gets seized, the cars get repossessed, friends disappear like ghosts at sunrise, and Marcus, for the first time in his privileged life, understands what it means to fall. He tries to salvage what's left, reaches out to old connections. But the people who smiled at his father's parties now look through him like he's made of glass. No one returns calls. No one offers help. The Chen name has become toxic, and Marcus is learning a hard truth about conditional love and fair-weather loyalty. 6 months after the indictments, he's living in a studio apartment in a part of town he used to drive through without looking. His degree means nothing without the network. His experience means nothing without the name. He sends out hundreds of resumes. Most go unanswered. The ones that do respond offer entry-level positions that barely cover rent. Pride is expensive, but desperation is a powerful motivator. He takes a job at a tech startup, not as an executive, not even as management. As a junior analyst, working under people younger than him, making a fraction of what he used to spend on shoes. The office is small, crowded, filled with the buzz of ambition and the glow of computer screens. His desk is by the window, overlooking the city his father used to own. Every morning he shows up. Every day he swallows what's left of his ego and does the work. It's humbling in ways he never thought possible. But there's something else too. Something unexpected. He's good at it. Without the safety net, without the name. He actually has to prove himself. And slowly, painfully, he starts to build something real. Then one Tuesday morning, everything changes again. There's a company-wide meeting. The founder is introducing a new chief innovation officer, someone brought in to lead the company's expansion into international markets. Marcus sits in the back row, half listening, checking emails on his phone. The doors open. Footsteps echo across the polished floor. And when he finally looks up, his breath catches in his throat. She walks to the front of the room with the kind of confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. Tailored suit, hair pulled back, those same eyes behind contact lenses now, sharp and assessing. Elena. But not the Elena from the cafeteria. Not the girl with the oversized sweater and the book pressed to her chest. This Eleanor commands attention without asking for it. This Eleanor has a resume that includes degrees from Oxford and Stanford, leadership positions at Fortune 500 companies, patents on technologies that changed industries. This Elena stands at the podium and speaks about vision and strategy with the clarity of someone who spent years proving that brilliance doesn't need volume. Marcus feels his stomach drop. She doesn't see him at first. Why would she? He's just another face in a crowd of employees. But as she scans the room during her presentation, their eyes meet. For just a second. Maybe two. Her expression doesn't change. No recognition flickers across her face. No acknowledgement of the past. She simply continues talking, laying out her plans for the company's future with the precision of someone who's thought 10 steps ahead. The meeting ends. People applaud. Marcus stays seated, his mind racing through 1,000 thoughts at once. Does she remember? How could she not? What are the chances? His hands are sweating. He tells himself it doesn't matter. That was a lifetime ago. Different people, different circumstances. But the weight in his chest tells a different story. Over the next few weeks, Elena proves why she was hired. She restructures departments, streamlines operations, identifies opportunities everyone else missed. She's brilliant and ruthless and fair. People respect her not out of fear, but out of genuine admiration for her competence. Marcus watches from a distance, doing his work, staying quiet, hoping to remain unnoticed. But the company is small enough that eventually, inevitably, their paths cross. It happens in the break room. Marcus is making coffee when she walks in. They're alone. The silence stretches like a wire pulled tight. He opens his mouth to speak, but she beats him to it. "Marcus Chen," she says, her voice even, unreadable. "I was wondering when we'd have this conversation." His heart is hammering. "Elena, I didn't know you worked here." She pours herself water, takes a sip, studies him with those sharp eyes. Interesting how life works out, isn't it? And in that moment, standing in a break room with cheap linoleum floors and a humming refrigerator, Marcus realizes something that makes his blood run cold. She hasn't forgotten. Not a single thing. And now, for the first time in their lives, she holds all the cards. The water cooler gurgles in the silence between them. Marcus can hear his own heartbeat, a drum solo against his ribs. Eleanor sets down her glass with deliberate care, the kind of precision that makes ordinary gestures feel weighted with meaning. She doesn't look angry. That's what unsettles him most. Anger he could understand. Anger he could apologize for, grovel before, attempt to wash away with words. But this calm assessment, this clinical observation of him standing there in his wrinkled button-down and discount shoes, this is something else entirely. "I need someone to lead the overseas logistics analysis for the Singapore expansion," she says, as if their previous exchange was merely a formality, a brief acknowledgement before moving to business. "Your manager says you have a background in international markets. Is that accurate, or is it another thing your father's money bought for you?" The words land like precision strikes. Not shouted, not spat with venom, just stated as facts waiting to be confirmed or denied. Marcus feels heat crawl up his neck. "I earned my degree, The connections, the opportunities after, those were different. But I learned the material. I know the work. She tilts her head slightly, studying him the way a scientist might examine a specimen under glass. Show me. I'm putting together a presentation for the board in 3 weeks. I need comprehensive market analysis, risk assessment, competitive landscape mapping, and financial projections for our first 2 years in Southeast Asian markets. You'll report directly to me, every day. Progress updates, challenges, questions. If you're as competent as you claim, this should be manageable. If you're not. She lets the sentence hang there, unfinished, more threatening in its incompleteness. Marcus nods, his throat dry. I can do it. We'll see. She picks up her glass and walks toward the door, then pauses. Marcus? He looks up. I don't give second chances because people deserve them. I give them because I'm curious to see what people do with them. Don't waste my curiosity. She leaves. The door swings shut with a soft click. Marcus stands alone in the break room, surrounded by the mundane architecture of corporate life. The bulletin board with its faded memos, the microwave with its permanent popcorn smell, the motivational poster about teamwork featuring rowing crews in perfect synchronization. Everything suddenly feels surreal, like he stepped into an alternate dimension where the past and present have collided and created something entirely unpredictable. That night he doesn't sleep. He works. Files spread across his tiny kitchen table, laptop screen glowing in the darkness, mug after mug of instant coffee going cold before he finishes them. He dives into research with a focus he hasn't felt in years. Trade regulations, cultural business practices, currency fluctuations, political stability indexes. Every detail matters now in ways they never did when success was guaranteed. Back then, thorough work was optional, a formality before the predetermined yes. Now, thoroughness is survival. The days blur together. Marcus arrives at the office before sunrise, leaves after dark. Elena's assistant schedules their daily check-ins with mechanical efficiency, 10 a.m. every day. Marcus walks into her office, larger than his apartment, windows overlooking the skyline his family used to dominate, and presents his progress. She listens with complete attention, asking questions that reveal how deeply she understands the material. Sometimes she pokes holes in his logic, sometimes she nods and tells him to continue. She never praises, never criticizes beyond what's necessary for improvement. She treats him exactly as she treats everyone else on her team, as a professional resource to be optimized. But there are moments, brief flickers of something else. Once he references a case study about market entry failures, and she mentions a book about corporate anthropology. You might find it useful, she says, jotting down the title. It's the same book she was reading that day in the cafeteria when he knocked it from her hands. He knows because he looked it up years later, during one of those late nights when insomnia dragged him through memories he'd rather forget. She has to know he recognizes it, but her face reveals nothing. 2 weeks in, Marcus hits a wall. The financial models aren't working. No matter how he adjusts the variables, the projected costs for establishing distribution networks keep exceeding acceptable margins. He stays up for 36 hours straight, rebuilding the analysis from scratch. But the numbers don't lie. At their morning meeting, he has to admit it. The current approach isn't viable. We'd need to partner with established local distributors, which means lower margins but significantly reduced risk and faster market penetration. He expects disappointment, maybe frustration at the wasted time. Instead, Elena leans back in her chair, a slight smile touching the corners of her mouth. That's the conclusion I reached 3 days ago. I was waiting to see if you'd keep forcing a solution that looked good on paper or admit when reality demanded a different approach. She pulls out a folder. I've already identified 3 potential partners in Singapore. I want you to evaluate them and recommend which one we should approach first. It's a test. Everything is a test. But Marcus is starting to understand that Elena's tests aren't about humiliation, they're about capacity. She's measuring not just what he knows, but how he thinks, how he adapts, whether he can set aside ego for effectiveness. In a strange way, it reminds him of his college professors, the ones whose classes he actually had to work for. The ones whose approval meant something because it was earned, not inherited. The presentation day arrives with the weight of consequence. The boardroom fills with senior executives, investors, external consultants brought in to assess the expansion strategy. Marcus sits in the back, his section of the analysis loaded and ready. Elena leads the presentation with the command of a general laying out battle plans. She moves through market opportunities, technological advantages, competitive positioning. Then she reaches the implementation phase. For the detailed logistics and financial modeling, I'm going to hand this over to Marcus Chen, who's led this analysis. Every head in the room turns. Marcus feels the familiar sensation of being observed, judged, measured, but this time there's no safety net, no name to fall back on, no father to make a phone call if things go wrong, just him and the work. He stands, moves to the front, and begins. The first few sentences feel stiff, mechanical. Then something shifts. He stops reading from notes and starts talking about the research, the patterns he discovered, the calculated risks and their mitigation strategies. He fields questions with growing confidence. When a board member challenges one of his assumptions, he doesn't deflect. He acknowledges the concern and explains his reasoning, even showing alternative scenarios he'd modeled but ultimately rejected and why. 45 minutes later, it's over. The board members nod, confer in low voices. Elena thanks them for their time. As people file out, several pause to shake Marcus's hand to compliment the thoroughness of the analysis. One older woman, a venture capitalist with a reputation for eviscerating weak presentations, stops in front of him. "That was solid work, young man. Reminded me why I invest in people who actually understand the ground-level reality of expansion." She leaves. Marcus exhales for what feels like the first time in an hour. Elena is packing up her materials. He approaches carefully. "Thank you for the opportunity to present." She closes her laptop, looks at him directly. "You earned it. The presentation was good. More importantly, the work behind it was honest. You didn't try to hide the challenges or oversell the opportunities. That's rarer than you'd think, especially among people who come from privilege." She picks up her bag. "The board approved the Singapore expansion. We'll need someone on the ground there for the first 6 months of implementation. Interested?" Marcus blinks. Singapore. 6 months. It's a real role. Real responsibility. "Yes, absolutely." "Good. We'll discuss details next week." She walks past him, then stops at the door. "Marcus, that work you did, that's who you are when you're not performing for an audience. Remember that." She leaves him standing in the empty boardroom, surrounded by leather chairs and polished wood and the lingering scent of expensive coffee. Through the windows, the city sprawls in every direction, indifferent and magnificent. Somewhere in that forest of steel and glass is the building where his father's company used to reign. Somewhere out there is the high school where he learned all the wrong lessons about power and worth. But standing here, in this moment, Marcus feels something he hasn't felt in longer than he can remember. Not pride exactly. Something quieter. Something that feels like the beginning of respect for himself. Earned through effort, rather than inherited through circumstance. That evening, he walks past Elena's office on his way out. The light is still on. She's at her desk, surrounded by papers, same as always. He hesitates, then knocks softly on the open door. She looks up, waiting. "Can I ask you something?" His voice is steady, but his hands are shaking slightly. "Why did you really give me this chance, after everything?" Elena sets down her pen. The silence stretches, but it's different from the tension in the break room weeks ago. This silence has room in it. Room for truth. She stands, walks to the window, looks out at the darkening sky. Because 10 years ago, a boy with everything taught me what it felt like to be nothing, and I spent every day after that proving I was something. I built myself into someone who couldn't be dismissed or diminished or made small by anyone's cruelty. She turns to face him, but success built on anger becomes its own kind of prison. At some point, I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. Someone who perpetuates cycles of humiliation, or someone who breaks them. Marcus feels something crack open in his chest. I'm sorry for what I did, for who I was. I know that doesn't... You're right. It doesn't change the past. Her voice is firm but not unkind. But apologies aren't magic spells. They don't erase harm. What matters is what comes after. Who you choose to become when no one's watching, when there's no benefit to being better except that it's the right thing to do. She walks back to her desk. Go home, Marcus. Get some rest. You have a lot of work ahead of you. He nods, turns to leave. At the threshold, he pauses. For what it's worth, you were never nothing, even back then. I was just too blind and stupid to see it. When he looks back, Elena's expression has softened slightly. Not forgiveness exactly. Something more complex. Recognition, perhaps. Acknowledgement that people can grow beyond their worst moments if they're willing to do the work. Good night, Marcus. Outside, rain has started to fall. Marcus stands on the sidewalk, letting it soak through his jacket, wash across his face. The city moves around him in rivers of light and shadow, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, each one a universe unto itself. He thinks about the boy he was, so certain that power meant making others feel small. He thinks about the man his father was, building empires on foundations of corruption, never realizing that what you build through dishonesty can't sustain weight. And he thinks about Elena, who transformed pain into purpose, who chose to meet cruelty not with revenge but with something far more challenging, the demand for genuine growth. The rain falls harder. Marcus starts walking, not toward the subway, but through the streets, letting his feet choose the direction. He ends up, almost without meaning to, in front of his old high school. The building looks smaller than he remembers, more ordinary. Through the lit windows he can see students in classrooms, teachers at boards, the everyday machinery of education and growth. Somewhere in there, maybe, is another kid like he was, learning the wrong lessons. And maybe, somewhere else in those rooms, is another kid like Elena was, enduring, surviving, building the foundations of who they'll become. He can't change the past, can't undo the harm. But standing here, soaked and shivering and strangely hopeful, Marcus understands that redemption isn't a destination. It's a direction. A choice you make every day to be better than you were, to contribute more than you take, to see people as they actually are rather than as reflections of your own insecurity. His phone buzzes. An email from Elena. Subject line, Singapore Prep Reading. Attached are 5 documents, market studies and cultural guides. At the bottom of the email, a single sentence, do the work, earn your transformation. Marcus reads it twice, then pockets his phone and turns toward home. The rain is starting to let up. Tomorrow, he'll begin preparing for Singapore. Tomorrow, he'll continue building a version of himself worth respecting. But tonight, walking through the wet streets of a city that no longer belongs to his family's legacy, Marcus Chen takes the first real breath of his new life and realizes that sometimes the people we hurt the most become the teachers we need the most, if we're brave enough to learn. Singapore arrives like a fever dream wrapped in humidity and neon. Marcus steps off the plane into air so thick it feels like breathing through wet cloth. The airport gleams with artificial perfection, all chrome and glass and efficiency, a temple to commerce and connection. He collects his single suitcase. Everything he owns now fits in one bag, a detail that would have horrified his younger self, and takes a cab through streets where old shophouses crouch beneath towering condominiums, where temples share blocks with luxury malls, where the past and future negotiate their coexistence in real time. The company has arranged a service department in the central business district. It's small, functional, nothing like the penthouses he grew up in, but the view from the 23rd floor shows him a city blazing with possibility. That first night, he stands at the window watching ships queue in the harbor, each one carrying cargo from somewhere to somewhere else, part of the invisible networks that keep the world connected. He thinks about how he's become cargo himself, being moved into position for purposes larger than his understanding. But there's freedom in that. Freedom in being useful rather than ornamental. The work consumes him. Elena wasn't exaggerating about the challenges. Establishing distribution networks means navigating bureaucratic labyrinths, cultural nuances that can't be learned from books, and the delicate dance of building trust in markets where your company's name means nothing. Marcus spends his days in meetings with potential partners, local consultants, government officials who smile politely while assessing whether this American company will respect their systems or try to bulldoze through them with Western arrogance. He learns to listen more than he speaks. He learns that silence can be a form of respect. He learns that doing business here means understanding that relationships precede transactions, that trust is currency more valuable than capital. Elena flies in once a month for progress reviews. They meet in his temporary office, a rented space in a co-working building where startups and regional branches conduct their operations. She's demanding but fair, pushing him to think beyond immediate problems toward systemic solutions. During her third visit, she stays an extra day. "Show me the city," she says after their formal meetings conclude. "I want to see it through the eyes of someone who's actually living here, not tourist highlights." They walk through neighborhoods tourists rarely visit. Hawker centers where locals eat breakfast at metal tables, the air heavy with the scent of kaya toast and kopi. Wet markets where fish still glisten and vegetables pile in chaotic abundance. Side streets where laundry hangs from windows and old men play checkers in the shade. Elena doesn't take photos. She just observes, absorbing the texture of daily life. At a corner stall, Marcus buys them both sugarcane juice, watching as the vendor feeds stalks through an ancient press, the sweet liquid flowing clear and cold. "You've changed," Elena says, sipping her drink as they sit on a bench overlooking a small park. Not just superficially, something fundamental. Marcus considers this. Around them, the city breathes its afternoon rhythm. Children playing, elderly practicing Tai Chi, office workers taking brief refuge from air-conditioned buildings. "I think I'm learning what it means to be competent rather than just credentialed. To be useful rather than important. Those feel like different things now." "They are different things," Elena agrees. "Importance is bestowed. Usefulness is demonstrated." She's quiet for a moment, then adds, "My parents were janitors, both of them. They immigrated when I was 7, worked night shifts cleaning office buildings while I slept on a cot in supply closets, doing homework by emergency exit lights. Every morning, I'd watch them come home exhausted, their hands raw from chemicals, their backs aching from bending and scrubbing. And every morning, they'd ask about my schoolwork before they slept." Marcus turns to look at her. In all their interactions, Elena has never revealed anything personal. She's been professional, measured, carefully boundaried. This offering of history feels significant, weighted. "I used to be ashamed," she continues, staring at nothing specific, lost in memory. "Kids at school would talk about their parents' jobs, lawyers, doctors, engineers. I'd lie, make up elaborate stories. Then one day, a boy in my class saw my mother cleaning the school bathrooms. He told everyone. For weeks I was invisible, or worse than invisible. I was something to mock, to pity, to use as a contrast to make themselves feel fortunate. She looks at Marcus now, direct and unflinching. Sound familiar? The words settle between them like stones. Marcus feels his throat tighten. That boy wasn't me, was it? No. Different school, different city. But you were that boy too, Marcus. Just a different version in a different cafeteria. The pattern's universal. Those who hurt others to prove their own worth, and those who survive that hurt by becoming undeniable. She finishes her juice, stands. My parents taught me something important, though. They said that dignity doesn't come from what you do or what you have. It comes from how you treat people when there's no benefit to treating them well. They clean toilets with more dignity than most executives bring to boardrooms. They walk back through streets now flooding with late afternoon light, everything golden and temporary. Marcus thinks about dignity, about all the ways he's understood power and worth and value. In his old life, dignity meant never being questioned, never being challenged, never having to prove anything because the proof was built into your name. But that wasn't dignity, that was just insulation from consequence. Why are you telling me this? He asks as they wait for a crossing signal. Elena watches the traffic flow past, a river of metal and purpose. Because I need you to understand something. This project we're building, it's not just about market expansion or profit margins. If we do this right, we're creating jobs, opportunities, pathways for people to build better lives. The warehouses we establish, the logistics networks we create, they'll employ hundreds of people. Drivers, inventory specialists, administrators. Those jobs matter. Those paychecks feed families, send kids to school, build futures. The signal changes. They cross. I need to know you understand that you're not just rehabilitating your image or escaping your father's shadow. I need to know you see the actual human stakes. I do, Marcus says, and realizes he means it completely. I see it now. That night, alone in his apartment, Marcus can't sleep. He opens his laptop and starts writing. Not a report or analysis, but something else. A message to his father, still in prison, still fighting appeals, still convinced the system wronged him, rather than the other way around. Marcus has avoided writing for months, unsure what to say, unsure if saying anything matters. But now, words pour out. He writes about Singapore, about Elena, about learning to measure his worth by what he contributes rather than what he possesses. He writes about dignity and responsibility and the difference between power over people and power with people. He writes about becoming someone he can respect, finally, in small increments and hard-won lessons. When he finishes, it's nearly dawn. He reads it over once, then deletes the entire thing. Some truths aren't for sending, they're for clarifying. His father wouldn't understand anyway, not yet, maybe not ever. But Marcus understands now, and that's what matters. The weeks accelerate. They secure partnerships with 2 local distributors. They hire a team of regional specialists. The first inventory arrives at a newly leased warehouse in Jurong, and Marcus stands there watching forklifts move pallets, watching the machinery of commerce begin its rhythms. There's satisfaction in this that no trust fund check ever provided. The satisfaction of seeing something work because you built it correctly, because you thought through problems and solved them, because you earned every piece through effort. Then, on a Tuesday morning 3 months into his Singapore assignment, everything tilts sideways. Marcus arrives at the office to find Elena already there, which is unusual. She's not scheduled to visit for another 2 weeks. Her face is unreadable but tense, the way taut wires look just before they snap. We need to talk. Conference room. Now. Inside, she opens her laptop, turns it so he can see the screen. It's an email chain. Marcus scans quickly, his stomach dropping with each line. Someone has been leaking proprietary information about their expansion strategy to competitors. Distribution routes, partner negotiations, pricing structures, everything they've worked to develop is being systematically shared. The leak is coming from inside their team, and according to the email metadata and communication patterns the company's security analysts have traced, the primary suspect is Marcus. "I didn't do this," he says immediately, his voice sharp with panic and disbelief. "Elena, you have to know I wouldn't." "What I know," she interrupts, her voice cold in ways he hasn't heard since their first conversation in the break room, "is that the evidence is pointing at you. IP addresses traced to your apartment, document access logs matching your credentials, timestamps that align with when you were the only one working late in the office." She closes the laptop. "The board wants you fired immediately and potentially prosecuted. I convinced them to give me 24 hours to investigate before making it official." Marcus feels like the floor is dissolving beneath him. "Someone's setting me up. They have to be. I've worked too hard, come too far." "That's exactly what someone guilty would say." Elena cuts him off. "It's also what someone innocent would say. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go through every single thing you've done, everyone you've interacted with, every system you've accessed. You're going to help me find the actual leak, or you're going to help me confirm that you're the leak. Either way, we're finding the truth." The next 24 hours blur into a nightmare of data logs and security footage and forensic digital analysis. Elena brings in a cybersecurity specialist, a sharp-eyed woman named May, who treats Marcus with clinical detachment, neither assuming guilt nor innocence, just following threads of evidence wherever they lead. They discover that Marcus's laptop was remotely accessed multiple times while he was away from his apartment. They find that someone cloned his credentials, creating a shadow digital identity that moved through systems under his name. The leak is real, but it's not him. The trail leads eventually to someone Marcus trained with, a colleague from the main office who resented being passed over for the Singapore role. Someone who saw Marcus, the fallen son of a disgraced tycoon, getting opportunities while more deserving people got overlooked. The evidence is conclusive. May presents it to Elena with characteristic efficiency, no drama, just facts arranged in irrefutable sequence. Elena dismisses May, leaving her alone with Marcus in the conference room as evening settles over Singapore. The silence between them is different now. Not hostile, but not quite comfortable. Something more complicated. "I'm sorry," Elena says finally. "I should have believed you immediately, but I couldn't. The evidence was too compelling and trust is expensive." Marcus shakes his head. "You did exactly what you should have done. You investigated without prejudice. You followed the evidence instead of assumptions. That's the right way." He looks at her directly. "But I need to know something. When you saw my name attached to that leak, what did you feel? Did some part of you want it to be true?" The question hangs between them, dangerous and necessary. Elena doesn't answer immediately. She stands, walks to the window overlooking the city now sparkling with evening lights. When she speaks, her voice carries a weariness he's never heard before. "Honestly, yes. Part of me wanted you to have sabotaged this because it would have confirmed that people don't really change. That the cruel boy in the cafeteria was just wearing a better mask. That all this growth and effort was performance rather than transformation." She turns to face him. "But I was wrong, and I'm glad I was wrong. Because if people can't change, then what's the point of any of this? What's the point of building anything if we're all just locked into our worst versions forever?" Marcus feels something shift in his chest, some weight he didn't know he was carrying finally lifting. "So where does that leave us?" Elena considers this, her expression softening in ways he rarely sees. "It leaves us with a choice. We can let this incident reinforce old wounds and old patterns, or we can acknowledge that trust isn't binary. It's something you build repeatedly through consistent action over time. You've been building it. I just needed a reminder to recognize that." She extends her hand across the table, not for a handshake but palm up, an offering. Marcus takes it, and for a moment they just stand there, two people who started as enemies, moved through professional respect, and arrived at something neither of them expected: genuine understanding. "The person who set you up has been fired and will face legal consequences," Elena says, releasing his hand. "The board has been briefed on what actually happened. Your name is cleared. But Marcus..." She waits until he meets her eyes. "This is your reminder that the world isn't done testing you. Redemption isn't a destination, it's a direction you have to choose every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." That night, Marcus stands on his apartment balcony watching Singapore breathe its nocturnal life. Somewhere below, night markets are opening, hawkers are firing up grills, people are meeting and laughing and conducting the small transactions that build lives. He thinks about the boy he was, so desperate to prove his importance that he diminished others. He thinks about the man his father remains, still refusing to see his own role in his destruction. And he thinks about Eleanor, who survived being made to feel worthless, and chose to respond not by replicating that cruelty, but by demanding better from herself and others. His phone buzzes. A message from Elena. "New project assignment when you return next month. Ready to keep earning your transformation?" Marcus types back a single word. "Always." Below him, the city glitters like scattered starlight, indifferent to individual struggles, eternal in its churn of ambition and survival. But Marcus feels, for perhaps the first time in his life, like he's part of something larger than his own story. Part of the great human project of becoming better than you were, of contributing more than you consume, of recognizing that everyone you meet is fighting battles you can't see and deserving of dignity you might forget to offer. The heat hasn't broken. The humidity still clings. But Marcus breathes it in, this air of second chances and hard-won respect, and knows that whatever comes next, he'll face it as someone finally worthy of the opportunities he's been given. Marcus returns to the main office on a morning when autumn is beginning its slow takeover of summer. The trees lining the corporate plaza are just starting to turn, edges of leaves bronzing like old photographs. He walks through the building's lobby with his single suitcase, nodding to security guards who recognize him now, not as the disgraced son of Richard Chen, but as the guy who spent 6 months building something real in Singapore. The difference is subtle but absolute. One identity was inherited, the other was earned. Elena's office door is open. She's on a call but waves him in, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. He sits, noticing new details he missed before. A small plant on the windowsill, thriving despite the artificial light. A photograph on the credenza showing Elena with 2 elderly people, her parents presumably, all 3 of them smiling at some family gathering. The walls hold framed certificates and awards, each one a waypoint on a journey from invisible girl to undeniable leader. He wonders briefly how many late nights and early mornings those frames represent, how much resilience and refusal to quit. She finishes her call, turns her attention fully to him. "Welcome back. How was the flight?" "Long. Worth it." Marcus sets down his bag. "I've been thinking about what comes next. The project assignment you mentioned." Elena leans back in her chair, studying him with that assessing gaze he's learned means she's measuring not just his words, but the intention behind them. "Before we get to that, I need to tell you something. The board has offered me the CEO position. Current CEO is retiring in 6 months, wants a smooth transition. They want me to take over." Marcus feels genuine happiness bloom in his chest. "That's incredible. You absolutely deserve it." "Maybe. Probably." She smiles slightly. "But it means restructuring, new priorities, and some difficult decisions about personnel and direction." She pauses, and Marcus recognizes this pause. It's the one she uses before delivering news that matters. I want you to take over the International Expansion Division, not as an analyst, as director, building teams, setting strategy, overseeing implementations across multiple markets. The words hang in the air between them, shimmering with possibility and weight. A year ago, Marcus would have accepted immediately, already thinking about the title, the salary, the restoration of status. Now, he sits with the offer, turning it over in his mind like a stone you examine from multiple angles before deciding if it's worth keeping. "Can I ask you something first?" he says. "Why me?" Not false modesty, genuine question. You could hire someone with more experience, better credentials, someone without my particular baggage. Elena nods slowly, as if she expected this question and respects him for asking it. "Because I've watched you fail and rebuild. I've watched you do good work when no one was watching, when there was no immediate reward, when you could have coasted and didn't. I've seen you make mistakes and own them, face unjust accusations and respond with evidence rather than defensiveness. Those qualities are rarer than credentials." She leans forward. "But more than that, Marcus, I've seen you treat people, servers at restaurants, junior analysts, security guards, warehouse workers, with genuine respect. Not performative kindness, but actual recognition of their worth. That matters more than any degree." Marcus feels emotion tighten his throat. "I keep thinking about my father, about how he built an empire by viewing people as resources to extract value from, and I wonder if I'm capable of building differently, or if the patterns are too deeply ingrained." "Your father's in prison because he never asked himself that question," Elena responds. "You ask it constantly. That's the difference. Patterns can be inherited, but they don't have to be perpetuated." She stands, walks to the window. Below them, the city moves through its afternoon rhythms. "I grew up watching my parents be treated like they were disposable. Invisible labor that kept buildings clean and functional, while the people who worked in those buildings never saw them, never acknowledged them. When I started building my career, I had a choice. I could become invisible to others, the way others made me invisible. Or I could make sure I saw people, really saw them. I chose the latter because I remember how it felt to not be seen." Marcus joins her at the window. They stand side by side, two people who began as polar opposites, who traveled through pain and growth and arrived at something like understanding. "If I take this position," he says quietly, "I want to do it right. Not just profitable, but ethical. Not just successful, but sustainable. Building something that creates value for everyone it touches, not just shareholders. That's exactly why I'm offering it to you," Elena says. "Because you finally understand that business isn't separate from humanity. It's an expression of humanity. Every decision we make affects real people leading real lives. That awareness, that responsibility, it should inform everything." They're quiet for a moment, watching the world below. Then Marcus says, "I saw my father last month, before I left for Singapore. First time since the sentencing." Elena turns to look at him, surprised but attentive. He's still angry, still convinced he was targeted unfairly, that everyone else cuts the same corners, that he just got unlucky. He doesn't see what he did as fundamentally wrong, just tactically unsuccessful. "That must have been hard to witness," Elena says softly. "It was, but it was also clarifying, because I realized I could become him, or I could become something else. And the difference isn't intelligence or opportunity, it's choice. Daily, unglamorous, often difficult choice to do the harder right thing instead of the easier wrong thing." Marcus looks at Elena directly. "You gave me the chance to make those choices, to prove to myself that I could be more than my worst moments. I know I can never fully repay that, but I'd like to try." Elena shakes her head gently. "You don't owe me repayment, Marcus. That's not how this works. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. I just provided circumstances where your effort could matter." She returns to her desk, pulls out a folder. But if you want to honor what you've learned, then pay it forward. Lead with integrity. Hire people who've been counted out and give them real opportunities. Build systems that distribute value fairly. Create a culture where people feel seen and valued. That's the work. Marcus takes the folder. Inside are preliminary plans for expansions into 3 new markets, each one presenting unique challenges and possibilities. He feels the familiar excitement of problems to solve, systems to build, potential to realize. But underneath that, something deeper, a sense of purpose that transcends personal achievement. The understanding that work, done well and ethically, can be a form of service. Over the following months, Marcus builds his team with intention. He hires a single mother who's been out of the workforce for years, but whose analytical skills are razor sharp. He brings on a recent graduate from a state school whose resume glows with hustle and creativity, but lacks the Ivy League credentials most companies filter for. He recruits a manager who left a toxic corporate environment and is hungry to build something better. Each hiring decision is a small act of faith in potential over pedigree. Elena, meanwhile, takes the CEO role and immediately begins restructuring the company around values that sound soft but prove ruthlessly effective. Fair wages, transparent communication, profit sharing that extends to warehouse workers, not just executives, investment in employee development. The board is skeptical initially, worried about margins and shareholder returns, but the numbers don't lie. Retention improves. Productivity increases. The company starts attracting top talent, not because of salary packages, but because of culture and mission. Turns out people want to work for organizations that see them as humans rather than human resources. One evening, nearly a year after his return from Singapore, Marcus is working late when Eleanor stops by his office. She's dressed casually, clearly on her way home, but pauses in his doorway. "You look like your father used to," she says, and Marcus's head snaps up, alarmed. She smiles. Working late, surrounded by plans and projections, but the difference is what you're working toward. He was building monuments to himself. You're building infrastructure for others. Marcus considers this. I think about him sometimes. Wonder if he ever has moments where he questions his choices. If he ever wishes he'd measured success differently. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Elena leans against the doorframe. But you can't base your growth on his enlightenment. That's his journey. Yours is separate now. She's quiet for a moment, then adds, "Do you know what I think about when I remember that day in the cafeteria? When you knocked my book down and walked away laughing?" Marcus braces himself, still carrying guilt he suspects will never fully dissolve. "What? I think about how much I learned from being underestimated. How being invisible forced me to develop substance, because surface was never going to be enough. How every person who dismissed me became fuel for proving that worth isn't bestowed by others. It's demonstrated through action." She meets his eyes. "I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, but I also can't deny it shaped me, made me resilient, taught me to build my identity on foundations that couldn't be taken away by someone else's opinion. I spent years wishing I could undo it," Marcus admits, "that moment and 1,000 others like it." "I know. But here's the thing about the past, Marcus. It's immutable. You can't edit it. You can only decide what it means going forward." Eleanor straightens. "You were cruel because you were taught that cruelty was power. You were exclusive because you were taught that exclusion proved worth. Those weren't original sins. They were learned behaviors, and what can be learned can be unlearned." Marcus stands, walks around his desk. They're facing each other now, two people who survived different forms of harm and emerged committed to creating something better. "Thank you," he says simply, "for the second chance, for the brutal honesty, for demanding I become someone worth respecting." Elena extends her hand, and this time when he takes it, the gesture feels less like a professional courtesy and more like a pact between allies. "Thank you for doing the work. for not settling for performance, for understanding that transformation isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. She releases his hand. Go home, Marcus. Rest. Tomorrow we're announcing the Brazil expansion, and you're leading the presentation. After she leaves, Marcus gathers his things and rides the elevator down to the lobby. Outside, the city is transitioning from day to night, that liminal hour when the world briefly exists in two states simultaneously. He walks instead of taking a cab, needing the movement, the air, the reminder that he exists in physical space and not just in spreadsheets and strategy documents. His path takes him past his old high school. It's locked now, empty, but through the windows he can see classrooms where equations still fill whiteboards and posters still proclaim the importance of effort and kindness. He thinks about the boy who walked these halls wearing confidence like armor, never understanding that real strength isn't about making others small. He thinks about Elena, sitting alone with her book, absorbing cruelty and transforming it into determination. And he thinks about all the invisible ways we shape each other, for better and worse, often without knowing the impact we're having. His phone buzzes. A text from his mother, who divorced his father during the trial and rebuilt her life with quiet determination. Proud of the man you're becoming, it reads. Just that, nothing elaborate. But Marcus feels the words settle into him like warmth spreading through cold hands. He responds, still working on it, every day. Because that's the truth, isn't it? Redemption isn't a destination you reach and then relax into. It's a direction you maintain through continuous choice and effort. It's the daily decision to see people fully, to contribute meaningfully, to build systems that lift rather than crush. It's understanding that your worst moments don't define you unless you let them, and your best moments only matter if you can sustain them. Marcus continues walking, passing restaurants where families gather, parks where children play under their parents' watchful eyes, bus stops where tired workers wait to go home. Each person carrying their own story, fighting their own battles, building their own versions of meaningful life. He's just one story among millions, no more important, no less real. But his story has become one he can respect, and in the end, maybe that's the only measure that truly matters. The girl he mocked in school doesn't have him on his knees in the way revenge fantasies imagine. There's no groveling, no dramatic comeuppance, no public humiliation reversed. Instead, she offered him something far more powerful and far more difficult, the opportunity to become someone worth knowing. The challenge to earn respect through competence rather than inheritance. The demand that he recognize the humanity in others that he once ignored. And in doing so, she taught him that the opposite of cruelty isn't just kindness. It's the sustained commitment to seeing people clearly, treating them fairly, and building a world where worth is demonstrated through action rather than bestowed through privilege. He thinks as he walks through the cooling evening that maybe the real question was never whether Elena would forgive him. The real question was whether he could forgive himself while simultaneously refusing to excuse himself. Whether he could carry his past honestly while working toward a better future. Whether he could transform shame into motivation without letting guilt become an identity. These are the questions that don't have clean answers, that require daily renegotiation, that define what it means to grow beyond your worst self. The city lights are fully on now, towers blazing against darkening sky. Marcus stops at a corner, looking up at the constellation of windows where people work and live and dream. Somewhere up there is his father's old office, now occupied by someone else's ambitions. Somewhere else is the company where he's building something that matters. And somewhere, in the space between past and future, is the person he's becoming, imperfect, works in progress, but finally, honestly trying. He takes a breath of cooling air and continues forward because that's all any of us can do. Keep moving, keep choosing, keep becoming. The girl he mocked doesn't have him on his knees. She has something better. She has his respect, his gratitude, and his commitment to building a world where fewer people have to survive what she survived, where fewer people become what he was. And in the end, that transformation, from careless cruelty to conscious contribution, might be the only revenge worth taking and the only redemption worth earning.